The girl accidentally dropped a piece of cured meat into the incense burner. Unexpectedly, the next second, the cured meat passed through a time warp and appeared beside an ancient general. The general stared at all of this in shock, for they had been surrounded by the enemy for many days and hadn't eaten any food for several days. The general believed this must be food bestowed upon him by God, so he immediately led his soldiers to give thanks for the divine blessing. Meanwhile, on the other side, the girl saw how magical the incense burner was, so she went back to the kitchen and threw in eggs, rice, and all kinds of food. With these supplies, the general and his soldiers temporarily regained their strength. However, that food wasn't nearly enough to solve the crisis. To get more provisions, he had to write a letter and toss it into the incense burner along with his dagger. Meanwhile, in the modern world, the girl was on the phone with her teacher, trying to figure out the secret of the incense burner. Suddenly, she saw a letter appearing out of nowhere inside the burner. After opening and reading it, she realized the burner could actually connect to the general's world. To learn more about the general, the girl went to the library. Through her teacher's guidance, she finally understood that in fact, the general's fate was full of hardship. He was the king's younger brother, who had defended the borders for decades, but the king deeply feared him, and when the general fought fiercely with the enemy, the king deliberately withheld reinforcements, causing nearly all of the general's soldiers to die in battle. To cover the retreat of his remaining men, the general was eventually killed by the enemy. The girl felt deep sympathy for the general's plight. After returning home, she decided to help the general out of his dire situation. Unfortunately, her bank balance wasn't enough to buy more supplies. Just as she was worrying about it, she accidentally noticed the dagger. Looking at the exquisite gems on it, an idea suddenly struck her. She found a well-known appraiser online and asked him to evaluate the dagger. The appraiser was astonished when he saw it. It was an artifact from thousands of years ago. According to his estimation, the dagger was worth at least $5 million. To see more of the girl's treasures, the appraiser eagerly flattered her, saying that if she ever needed anything, she could always contact him. After ending her live stream, the girl pinched her face in disbelief. This dagger was going to completely change her fate. The girl then wrote to the general, promising she would send supplies to him. The general soon received the girl's letter. His lieutenant was thrilled to hear it. With divine assistance, they were sure to survive this crisis. To receive the shipment, the lieutenant immediately ordered his men to prepare containers and sacks. At that moment, the girl had already rented a warehouse. She bought large quantities of flour and rice, and looking at the piles of supplies inside, she felt very satisfied. When no one was around, she began tossing the supplies into the incense burner. Soon, the general's side was filled with provisions. However, when the king found out, he was furious. He had originally planned to use this chance to eliminate the general, but unexpectedly, the general somehow acquired massive supplies. He immediately ordered an assassin to kill the general. The general was unaware of all this, and to thank the gods for their aid, he thought deeply, and finally threw his jade pendant into the incense burner. The girl, exhausted after a long day, returned home wearily. When she saw the thank you letter inside the burner, she realized that the pendant was the only keepsake left by the general's grandmother. The girl didn't want to accept such a precious gift, so she wrote back to the general, saying she would keep it safe for him for now, and once he won the war, she would return it to him. However, after days of exhaustion and hardship, the general had fallen seriously ill. The lieutenant felt heartbroken when he saw him, and wanted to summon the army doctor to treat the general. However, the general knew very well that his illness could not be cured. Just then, it was time for him to take his medicine. The lieutenant was about to fetch it when the assassin suddenly appeared. He easily defeated the lieutenant, and then the general and the assassin engaged in a fierce fight. However, the general was kind-hearted and refused to harm the assassin during the fight. In the end, he was unfortunately stabbed. After the doctor's treatment, the general's condition was dire. Even if a miracle doctor came, it would likely be impossible to save his life. When the lieutenant learned this, he was furious, but he couldn't blame the doctor. To save the general, the lieutenant remembered the magical incense burner. He immediately wrote a letter to the girl. Unfortunately, the girl had just left home and didn't see the lieutenant's message. When the enemy learned of the general's condition, they decided to take advantage of the situation to wipe out his army completely. To avoid the enemy's assault, the lieutenant reluctantly drove a carriage and took the general away from the camp, but shortly after they fled, they were ambushed by the enemy. Seeing the trapped general, the enemy urged the general and his lieutenant to surrender. However, the lieutenant was determined to protect the general with his life. A fierce battle broke out between them. However, the lieutenant alone could not possibly fend off so many foes. Meanwhile, the girl had learned of the general's plight. She prepared not only medicine, but also bought all kinds of gear, planning to rescue the general herself. However, no matter how many times she tried, she found she couldn't travel through. Until the jade pendant fell, the girl finally understood why. At that moment, the lieutenant had been wounded and captured by the enemy. And just as the enemy was about to kill the general, the girl finally arrived.